Denise Martinez never imagined that one afternoon at the library would change her life forever. She was just another single mother trying to make ends meet, watching her son Marcus read in the children's section when she spotted a young boy crying alone over a torn book. What happened next seemed like nothing more than a simple act of kindness, but 23 years later, she would receive an invitation that would leave her speechless. The boy she had comforted that day had grown up to become a best-selling author, and he was about to give her the most incredible gift imaginable, a gift that would honor not just her kindness, but transform her deepest can. Dreams into reality. The bookstore he built wasn't just any bookstore. It was named after her, and at its heart sat the very same book they had shared all those years ago. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button for more real, emotional, life-changing stories like this, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Riverside Public Library, casting long golden rectangles across the worn carpet where children sat cross-legged with picture books spread before them. Denise Martinez adjusted her position on the uncomfortable plastic chair, her back aching from the double shift she had pulled at the diner the night before. Her dark eyes, rimmed with the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched there since her divorce 2 years prior, watched her 7-year-old son Marcus as he carefully turned the pages of a dinosaur encyclopedia, his small finger tracing the illustrations with the same methodical precision he applied to everything in his young life. The library had become their sanctuary, a place where the weight of unpaid bills and the constant worry about making rent could be temporarily forgotten. Here, surrounded by thousands of stories and adventures, Denise could pretend that their cramped one-bedroom apartment wasn't falling apart, that her ancient Honda wasn't making that concerning rattling noise she couldn't afford to fix, and that she wasn't counting every dollar until her next paycheck. The library was free, the air conditioning worked, and Marcus could read to his heart's content without her having to worry about the cost. She pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders, the fabric thin from too many washings, and tried to focus on the romance novel she had picked up from the returns cart. Reading had always been her escape, even as a child growing up in the housing projects on the east side of town. Books had shown her worlds beyond the concrete and chain-link fences of her neighborhood, had whispered promises of possibilities that seemed as distant as the stars. Now, at 32, those dreams felt more like echoes of a younger, more optimistic version of herself. A soft, sniffling sound drew her attention away from her book. Across the children's section, partially hidden behind a tall shelf of picture books, a boy who looked to be about 9 or 10 years old sat alone on the floor. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and his dark hair fell forward, obscuring his face as he hunched over something in his lap. Denise glanced around the library, searching for a parent or guardian, but saw none. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, was busy helping an elderly man at the reference desk, her back turned to the children's area. The boy's crying grew slightly louder, a sound of genuine distress that tugged at something deep in Denise's chest. She had always been drawn to children in need, perhaps because she remembered too well what it felt like to be small and frightened, with no one to turn to. Her own childhood had been marked by her mother's long work hours and her father's absence, leaving her to navigate many difficulties alone. She would not let another child suffer in silence if she could help it. Setting her book aside, Denise rose from her chair and walked quietly toward the crying child. As she drew closer, she could see what had caused his distress. In his small hands, he held a hardcover copy of The Secret Garden, one of the library's older editions. The spine was cracked, and one of the pages had torn completely away from the binding, hanging by just a thin strip of paper. The boy clutched the damaged book as if it were something precious and irreplaceable, his tears falling onto the torn page. "Hey there," Denise said softly, crouching down beside him. "I'm Denise. What's your name?" The boy looked up, his brown eyes wide and frightened, tears still streaming down his cheeks. He was thin, almost gaunt, with clothes that hung loose on his small frame. His sneakers had holes in the toes, and his t-shirt was faded and too big, as if it had been handed down from an older sibling or picked up from a donation bin. Despite his obvious poverty, there was something about his eyes, an intelligence and depth that seemed far older than his years. "I'm David," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to break it. I was just trying to read, and the page just fell out. They're going to be so mad at me. I don't have money to pay for it." Fresh tears welled up in his eyes, and Denise felt her heart break a little. She recognized the fear in his voice, the terror of a child who had learned too young that mistakes often came with consequences he couldn't afford. She had worn that same expression many times as a girl, had felt that same crushing weight of responsibility for things beyond her control. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, settling more comfortably on the floor beside him. "Accidents happen. This old book has probably been read by hundreds of kids over the years. One little tear doesn't mean it's ruined." David shook his head vigorously, his grip tightening on the book. "But it's broken now. Mrs. Henderson is going to call my mom, and she's already working so hard. She can't pay for a new book. We barely have enough for food." The raw honesty in his words hit Denise like a physical blow. She saw so much of her own son in this boy, the premature awareness of financial struggle, the desire to protect a parent from additional burdens. It was a weight no child should have to carry, yet she knew too many who did. "Can I take a look at it?" she asked gently, extending her hands. "I used to work in a bookstore when I was younger. I learned a few tricks about fixing torn pages." David hesitated for a moment, then carefully placed the book in her hands. The damage was actually minor, just a single page that had separated from the binding along the spine. With the right technique, and perhaps a tiny bit of clear tape from the librarian's desk, it could be easily repaired. "You know what? This isn't nearly as bad as it looks," Denise said, examining the tear carefully. "See how clean this edge is? That means the paper didn't actually rip. It just came unglued from where it was attached to the spine. This happens all the time with older books. They get loved so much that the glue gets tired." She pointed to the thin line of old adhesive still visible along the page's edge. "All we need to do is put a tiny bit of book tape right here, and it'll be good as new. Mrs. Henderson has supplies for this kind of repair. Libraries expect books to need fixing sometimes. That's part of what they're for." David's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. "Really? You think she won't be mad?" "I'm absolutely certain she won't be mad," Denise said firmly. "In fact, I bet she'll be proud of you for being so careful with the books and for wanting to make sure it gets fixed properly. That shows you really care about the library and the other kids who want to read this story." She stood up, brushing dust off her jeans, and extended her hand to David. "Come on. Let's go talk to Mrs. Henderson together. I'll explain what happened, and we'll get this book fixed up right now." David looked up at her with an expression of such gratitude and relief that Denise had to blink back tears of her own. He took her hand, his small fingers cold and slightly trembling, and together they walked toward the circulation desk where Mrs. Henderson was organizing returned books. "Excuse me, Mrs. Henderson," Denise said as they approached. "David here had a little accident with one of the books, and we were hoping you might have some book tape so we can fix it." Mrs. Henderson, a kindly woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and reading glasses that perpetually hung from a chain around her neck, looked down at David with immediate concern. Her expression softened when she saw the book in his hands and the worried look on his face. "Oh my, what happened here?" she asked, not in the stern tone David had clearly been expecting, but with the gentle concern of someone who had worked with children and books for decades. "The page came loose when I was reading," David said in a small voice, holding up the book to show her the damage. "I'm really sorry. I tried to be careful." Mrs. Henderson took the book and examined it closely, her experienced eyes quickly assessing the damage. Well, Would you look at that? This is one of our oldest copies of The Secret Garden. I'm actually impressed it's held together this long. This book has been checked out hundreds of times over the years. The binding was bound to give way. Eventually, she smiled at David, who looked shocked by her calm reaction. This is exactly the kind of repair we do all the time. Nothing to worry about at all. Would you like to help me fix it? I always appreciate an extra pair of careful hands. David nodded eagerly, and Mrs. Henderson led them to a small workstation behind the circulation desk where she kept her book repair supplies. She showed David how to apply just the right amount of clear book tape to reattach the page to the spine, explaining each step of the process as if he were learning a valuable skill rather than fixing a mistake. There we go, she said, as David carefully pressed the repaired page back into place. Good as new. Actually, probably stronger than it was before. That's some very neat work, David. Have you thought about volunteering to help with book repairs? We could always use someone with such gentle hands. David beamed at the praise, his entire posture transforming from dejected to proud. Really? You'd let me help fix books? Of course, Mrs. Henderson said. Caring for books is one of the most important jobs there is. Stories need to be preserved so they can be shared with new readers. You'd be helping make sure other children can enjoy this beautiful story for years to come. As they walked back toward the children's section, David clutched the repaired book to his chest, his face glowing with an expression Denise hadn't seen since they'd first approached him. The transformation was remarkable. From a frightened child convinced he had done something terrible to a young person who felt valued and capable. Miss Denise, David said as they reached the area where Marcus was still absorbed in his dinosaur book. Thank you for helping me. I was so scared, but you made everything okay. Denise knelt down to his level, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. David, I want you to remember something very important. Accidents happen to everyone, even grown-ups. The measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, it's how they handle those mistakes and what they learn from them. You did exactly the right thing by staying calm and asking for help. That shows real maturity. She paused, looking into his earnest brown eyes. And another thing, books are meant to be read and loved, even if that means they sometimes get a little worn around the edges. The stories inside don't care if the pages are perfect. They just want to be shared. Don't ever be afraid to read because you might damage a book. The greatest damage would be if the stories never got to meet new friends like you. David nodded solemnly, absorbing her words with the serious consideration of a child who had learned to pay attention to adult wisdom. I'll remember that. And I'll take really good care of this book. I promise. I know you will, Denise said, ruffling his hair gently. Now, why don't you find a comfortable spot and enjoy your story? The Secret Garden is one of my favorites. It's about a little girl who discovers that with patience and care, beautiful things can grow in the most unexpected places. As David settled into a nearby chair with his book, Denise returned to her own seat, but found it difficult to concentrate on her romance novel. She kept glancing over at the boy, watching as he turned each page. With exaggerated care, completely absorbed in the story of Mary Lennox and her discovery of the hidden garden. There was something about his intense focus, the way he seemed to disappear completely into the world of the book. That reminded her of herself at that age. Marcus looked up from his dinosaur encyclopedia and noticed David for the first time. Mom, who's that kid? He asked in a loud whisper, but 7-year-old seemed to think was actually quiet. That's David, Denise said softly. He had a little problem with his book, but we got it sorted out. Why don't you go introduce yourself? He looks like he might enjoy having a friend to talk to about books. Marcus, who had inherited his mother's natural friendliness despite his generally shy nature, closed his encyclopedia and walked over to David's chair. Hi, I'm Marcus. What are you reading? David looked up, startled to be addressed, but his face lit up when he saw Marcus's genuine interest. It's called The Secret Garden. It's about this girl who finds a garden that's been locked up and forgotten, and she brings it back to life. It's really good. Cool, Marcus said, settling on the floor next to David's chair. I like stories about finding hidden things. I'm reading about dinosaurs. Did you know that some dinosaurs were as small as chickens? The two boys began chatting about books and dinosaurs, their conversation flowing with the easy camaraderie that children could form within minutes of meeting. Denise watched them with a warm feeling in her chest. Grateful that Marcus was developing the same instinct to reach out to others that she hoped she was modeling for him. As the afternoon wore on, she learned more about David through the fragments of conversation she overheard. He lived with his mother in an apartment complex on the other side of town, the same neighborhood where Denise had grown up. His mother worked 2 jobs. One at a factory during the day and another cleaning offices at night, which explained why David was at the library alone after school. He was clearly bright, with a vocabulary that impressed even Mrs. Henderson when he asked her about the etymology of certain words he encountered in his reading. When it came time for them to leave, David approached Denise hesitantly, still clutching The Secret Garden in his arms. Miss Denise, thank you again for helping me today. I was wondering, do you think I could check this book out? I'd really like to finish reading it. Of course you can, Denise said, smiling at his formal politeness. That's what libraries are for. And David, if you ever need help with anything else, I'm here most afternoons with Marcus. Please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, David said solemnly. I hope I see you again soon. As they walked to the circulation desk together, David clutching his book and Marcus carrying his stack of dinosaur books, Denise felt a strange sense of completion, as if she had participated in something more significant than a simple act of kindness. There had been something in David's eyes, a hunger for knowledge and stories that reminded her powerfully of her own childhood dreams. She found herself hoping that life would be kinder to him than it had been to her at his age, that his love of reading would open doors that had remained closed to her. Over the following weeks, Denise and Marcus encountered David at the library several more times. He had finished The Secret Garden and moved on to other classics, working his way through the children's section with methodical determination. He always greeted them warmly and gradually began to open up about his life and his dreams. His mother, Maria, worked incredibly hard to support them, but money was always tight. David had learned to be self-sufficient at an early age, walking to the library after school and spending his afternoons reading until it was time to go home and start dinner for himself and his mother. He dreamed of becoming a writer someday. Though he spoke of this ambition with the wistful uncertainty of a child who understood that dreams and reality didn't always align, Denise found herself looking forward to these encounters. Drawn to David's quiet intelligence and his genuine passion for stories, she began bringing extra snacks in her purse, offering them casually to both boys as they read. David always accepted gratefully but never asked for anything, and she could see him carefully rationing whatever she gave him, making it last as long as possible. One afternoon in late October, as the trees outside the library blazed with autumn colors, Denise arrived to find David sitting alone in their usual spot, but he wasn't reading. Instead, he was staring out the window with an expression of deep sadness that seemed far too heavy for his young shoulders. His latest book, a collection of fairy tales, lay closed on the table beside him. "David, what's wrong?" Denise asked, settling into the chair next to him. Marcus was at a friend's house that day, so she had come to the library alone, planning to use the quiet time to work on some job applications she had been putting off. David turned to her with eyes that were red-rimmed and weary. "My mom says we might have to move again. The rent went up, and she can't afford it anymore. She's looking for a cheaper place, but everything she can afford is really far away. I might have to change schools and everything." The words tumbled out of him in a rush, as if he had been holding them back for days. "I don't want to leave. I like it here. I like Mrs. Henderson and the library, and I like seeing you and Marcus. What if the new place doesn't have a good library? What if I can't find books to read?" Denise felt her heart clench with sympathy. She knew exactly how David felt, the powerlessness of childhood in the face of adult decisions driven by necessity rather than desire. She had moved frequently as a child, always chasing cheaper rent or better opportunities that never quite materialized. Each move had meant leaving behind friends, familiar places, and the small securities that made life bearable. "Oh, David," she said softly, "I know how scary that must feel. Moving is hard, especially when you have to leave places and people you care about. But I want you to know something important. The love of reading that you have, the way stories make you feel, that goes with you wherever you go. No one can take that away from you." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "And libraries. Good libraries with caring librarians like Mrs. Henderson, they exist in lots of places. Part of what makes them special is that they're all connected by the same mission: to make sure everyone has access to books and stories, no matter who they are or how much money they have." David nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. At his age, abstract reassurances carried less weight than concrete realities, and the reality was that he was losing the stability he had found in this place. "You know what?" Denise said, struck by a sudden inspiration. "Why don't we make sure you have some books of your own to take with you, no matter where you go? I've been thinking about cleaning out my book collection at home. I have lots of books that I've read and loved, and I think they'd be happier with someone who would appreciate them as much as you do." David's eyes widened. "You would give me your books?" "But they're yours." "Books are meant to be shared," Denise said, echoing the words she had spoken to him on that first day. "I've gotten all the joy I can from reading them. Now it's time for them to bring joy to someone else. Besides, I think there's something magical about passing a beloved book on to the right person. It's like introducing two friends who you know will love each other." The smile that spread across David's face was the first genuine happiness she had seen from him that day. "I would take really good care of them, I promise." "I know you would," Denise said. "And David, even if you do have to move, that doesn't mean we can't stay in touch. I could give you my address, and maybe you could write me letters sometimes. Tell me about the books you're reading and the new places you discover. I would love to hear about your adventures." The idea of maintaining connection beyond the immediate crisis seemed to lift David's spirits considerably. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about books, with David telling her about his favorite stories and characters, and Denise sharing some of her own reading memories from childhood. She was struck once again by his sophisticated understanding of narrative and character, his ability to see themes and connections that impressed her with their insight. That weekend, Denise went through her small apartment, carefully selecting books that she thought David would enjoy and that would serve him well as he grew older. She chose a mix of classics and contemporary novels, poetry and nonfiction, trying to create a collection that would grow with him and expand his horizons. She also included a blank notebook and a set of pens, thinking of his dream of becoming a writer. When she brought the box of books to the library the following Monday, David's reaction was everything she had hoped for, and more. He went through each book carefully, reading the back covers and examining the illustrations with the reverence of someone who understood that he was receiving something precious. Several times, he looked up at her with an expression of such gratitude that she had to blink back tears. "Miss Denise, this is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me," he said solemnly. "I don't know how to thank you enough." "You don't need to thank me," Denise replied. "Just enjoy them. Read them and love them and let them take you on adventures. And someday, when you're all grown up and have your own library, maybe you'll pass some of them on to another child who needs them." David nodded seriously, as if she had given him a sacred charge. "I will. I promise I will." As it turned out, David's family did end up moving, but not as far as they had feared. Maria found a small apartment in a complex about 20 minutes away, still within the same school district, but far enough that the daily trips to the library would no longer be practical. David spent his last week at the Riverside Library reading as much as he could, as if trying to absorb enough stories to sustain him through the transition. On his final day, he sought out Denise and Marcus to say goodbye. He had grown thinner over the past few weeks, the stress of the impending move and his family's financial struggles evident in his pinched features and the shadows under his eyes. But his spirit remained strong, buoyed by the book she had given him and the promise of new stories to discover. "I'm going to miss you both so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You made everything better when I was scared. I'll never forget how kind you were to me." Denise hugged him tightly, this brave little boy who had somehow found his way into her heart. "We'll miss you too, David, but this isn't really goodbye. You'll always be connected to us through the stories we've shared and the love of reading that brought us together. And remember, you have my address. I want to hear all about your new adventures." Marcus, who had become genuinely fond of his library friend, gave David one of his prized dinosaur books as a farewell gift. "So you don't forget us," he said with the matter-of-fact generosity of childhood. David accepted the gift with tears in his eyes, promising to treasure it always. As they watched him walk out of the library for the last time, his backpack heavy with the books Denise had given him, both she and Marcus felt the particular sadness that comes with saying goodbye to someone who has touched your life in unexpected ways. True to his word, David did write to Denise, sending her carefully crafted letters that chronicled his adjustment to his new neighborhood and school. His writing skills were impressive for his age, showing a natural feel for language and storytelling that reinforced her belief in his potential. He told her about the books he was reading, both from her gift and from his new local library, and began sharing short stories and poems he was writing in the notebook she had included with the books. Over the months and years that followed, their correspondence continued sporadically. As David grew older, the letters became less frequent, which Denise understood was natural as he developed new friendships and interests. She cherished each one she received, watching through his words as he grew from a lonely, bookish child into a confident teenager who had found his place in the world through his love of literature and writing. Marcus grew too, of course, and their own lives changed in countless ways. Denise eventually returned to school to get her teaching degree, fulfilling a dream she had deferred for years due to financial constraints. She became an elementary school teacher, drawn to working with children who reminded her of David and of herself at that age. Kids who needed someone to believe in their potential and help them navigate the challenges that came with growing up without many advantages. The years passed, and gradually the letters from David stopped coming altogether. Denise understood this was inevitable, but she often found herself wondering what had become of the serious little boy who had loved books so much. She hoped he was happy, that he had found ways to nurture his love of stories, and that life had been kind to his dreams. Teaching became Denise's calling in ways she had never expected. She specialized in working with children from low-income families, using her own experiences to understand the challenges they faced and to help them see education as a path to broader possibilities. She created classroom libraries filled with diverse books, organized reading programs that connected students with community mentors, and advocated tirelessly for resources that would give her students the same kinds of opportunities that middle-class children took for granted. Marcus thrived as well, growing into a thoughtful young man who shared his mother's commitment to helping others. He studied social work in college and returned to their hometown to work with at-risk youth. carrying forward the lessons of compassion and service that Denise had modeled throughout his childhood. As Denise approached her 60th birthday, she began to think seriously about retirement. She had given 3 decades to teaching, had touched countless young lives, and felt ready to pursue some of the dreams she had deferred in service of others. Chief among these was a fantasy she had harbored since childhood: opening a small bookstore that would serve as a community gathering place, somewhere that children and adults could discover new stories and share their love of reading. It was a dream that seemed both appealing and utterly impractical. She had managed to save some money over the years, but nowhere near enough to start a business, especially in an economy where independent bookstores struggled to compete with online retailers and large chains. Still, she found herself driving past empty storefronts and imagining what they might look like, filled with books, comfortable reading chairs, and the quiet energy of people lost in stories. One crisp morning in early November, just a few weeks before her official retirement date, Denise found an unexpected envelope in her mailbox. The return address was unfamiliar, from a literary agency in New York, and her name was written in elegant script across heavy cream-colored paper. Puzzled, she opened it carefully, wondering if it might be some kind of marketing materials or perhaps a case of mistaken identity. Inside was a formal invitation, printed on matching stationery, that took her breath away. "You are cordially invited to the grand opening of Miss Denise's Library of Dreams, a new independent bookstore celebrating the power of stories to transform lives. Please join us for an evening of readings, refreshments, and the unveiling of a space dedicated to fostering the love of literature in our community. The celebration will take place on Saturday, November 15th at 7:00 p.m. at 423 Maple Street in downtown Riverside. We hope you will honor us with your presence as we begin this new chapter." The invitation was signed simply, "With deepest gratitude and admiration, your friend David." Denise sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling as she reread the invitation multiple times, certain that she must be misunderstanding something. Miss Denise's Library of Dreams. The name sent shivers through her entire body. Could this possibly be the David she had known all those years ago? The thin, frightened little boy who had cried over a torn library book had somehow grown up to become successful enough to open a bookstore, and not just any bookstore, but one named in her honor. She called Marcus immediately, her voice shaking as she read him the invitation over the phone. He was as stunned as she was, remembering David clearly despite the passage of years. They speculated about how this could have happened, what David might have done with his life, and whether this was really the same person or some extraordinary coincidence. The address on the invitation was in the Arts District of downtown Riverside, an area that had undergone significant revitalization in recent years. Historic buildings had been converted into galleries, cafes, and boutique shops, creating a vibrant cultural hub that drew visitors from throughout the region. The specific address, 423 Maple Street, was a beautiful old Victorian building that had been empty for years, its ornate architecture and large windows making it a landmark that everyone noticed, but no one had been able to afford to restore. As the date of the grand opening approached, Denise found herself consumed with curiosity and a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. Part of her worried that this might be some kind of elaborate mistake or cruel joke, that she would arrive to find herself unwelcome or discover that this David was someone else entirely. But a larger part of her, the part that still believed in the magic of stories and the power of human connection, felt certain that something wonderful was about to happen. She chose her outfit carefully for the evening, settling on a navy blue dress that Marcus had given her for her last birthday, paired with the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. She wanted to look presentable but not overdressed, approachable but respectful of what appeared to be a formal occasion. As she prepared to leave her apartment, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and was surprised to realize how nervous she looked, like a teenager getting ready for a first date. The drive to downtown Riverside took her through familiar streets that held decades of memories. She passed the diner where she had worked all those years ago, now converted into a trendy gastropub with exposed brick walls and craft cocktails. She drove by Marcus's old elementary school, where she had attended countless parent-teacher conferences and school plays, and where she had first begun to dream of becoming a teacher herself. Each landmark reminded her of the journey that had brought her to this moment, the struggles and triumphs that had shaped her into the person she had become. As she turned onto Maple Street, she could immediately see that something special was happening at 423. The old Victorian building was ablaze with warm light, its windows glowing invitingly against the early evening darkness. People were gathering on the sidewalk outside, well-dressed adults holding wine glasses and chatting in the animated way that suggested a celebration. Paper lanterns had been strung between the old-fashioned street lamps, and she could see that the building's facade had been beautifully restored, its gingerbread trim painted in welcoming shades of green and gold. Denise parked her car and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Through the large front windows, she could see shelves lined with books, comfortable seating areas, and groups of people moving through the space with the relaxed pleasure of book lovers discovering a new haven. It looked exactly like the kind of bookstore she had always dreamed of creating, warm and inviting and obviously loved. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of her car and walked toward the entrance. As she approached, she noticed a beautifully hand-lettered sign beside the door that read, "Miss Denise's Library of Dreams, where every story finds its home." Below that, in smaller letters, was a quote that made her heart skip. "Books are meant to be shared, and the greatest damage would be if the stories never got to meet new friends." Those were her own words, spoken to a frightened little boy in a library more than 20 years ago. Someone had remembered them, had found them meaningful enough to feature prominently at what was clearly a significant event. The realization that her casual words of comfort had somehow stayed with someone all these years brought tears to her eyes. As she stepped through the front door, she was immediately enveloped by the wonderful smell of books, coffee, and something deliciously baked. The interior of the store was even more beautiful than she had glimpsed from outside. The original hardwood floors had been restored to a rich gleam, and the high ceilings were decorated with vintage light fixtures that cast a warm, golden glow throughout the space. Bookcases lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with carefully curated selections that seemed to include everything from classic literature to contemporary fiction, poetry, children's books, and local history. Comfortable armchairs and small tables were scattered throughout the space, creating intimate reading nooks where people could settle in with a book and a cup of coffee. A small stage had been set up in one corner, where a woman was currently reading from what appeared to be a collection of poetry, her voice carrying clearly through the appreciative crowd. But what caught Denise's attention most powerfully was a display case in the center of the store, spotlit and obviously positioned as a focal point. Inside, opened to a specific page, was a familiar hardcover book with a cracked spine and slightly worn edges. Even from across the room, she recognized it immediately. The library copy of The Secret Garden that she and David had repaired together all those years ago. "Miss Denise?" She turned at the sound of her name, spoken in a voice that was deeper and more confident than she remembered, but still carried traces of the shy, serious child she had known. Standing before her was a tall, lean man in his early 30s, with dark hair that showed touches of premature gray at the temples, and the same intelligent brown eyes that had looked up at her with such gratitude in the library. He was well dressed in a way that suggested success but not ostentation, wearing a dark blazer over dark jeans and a crisp white shirt. Most striking was his expression, a mixture of joy, nervousness, and something that could only be described as love. "David?" she whispered, hardly able to believe that this accomplished-looking man was the same person as the thin, frightened boy she remembered. "It's me," he said, his face breaking into a smile that transformed his entire appearance, making him look suddenly much younger and bringing back clear echoes of the child he had been. "I can't believe you came. I mean, I hoped you would, but I wasn't sure if you'd remember me or if you'd want to be part of this." Before she could respond, he stepped forward and wrapped her in a gentle hug, the kind of embrace that spoke of deep affection and long-held gratitude. She hugged him back, marveling at how tall he had grown, how solid and confident he felt, so different from the fragile child who had trembled in the library that day. "Of course I remember you," she said, pulling back to look at him properly. "How could I forget? But David, this is incredible. I don't understand. How did you do all this? And why did you name it after me?" David's eyes grew bright with unshed tears, and for a moment she could see the vulnerable boy he had once been shining through the successful man he had become. "Miss Denise, everything I am today started with that day in the library when you helped me fix that book. You have no idea what that meant to me, what you meant to me." He gestured around the beautiful bookstore, his voice growing stronger with emotion. "You taught me that stories matter, that books are meant to be shared, that kindness can change everything. You gave me my first real library, those books you brought me when we were moving. And you believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. This place exists because of you." Denise felt overwhelmed, struggling to process the connection between her simple act of kindness and this magnificent space filled with books and people. "But David, what happened to you?" "The last letter I got from you was when you were about 16. I always wondered, but I never knew how to find you." "I know, and I'm sorry about that," David said, his expression apologetic. "Life got complicated for a while. Mom got sick when I was in high school, and I had to work to help support us. I kept writing, though, always kept writing. I would think about you and those books you gave me, and I'd remember what you said about stories wanting to be shared." He paused, looking around the store with obvious pride and satisfaction. "I got a scholarship to college, studied literature and writing. After graduation, I moved to New York and struggled for years. Waiting tables and working in bookstores while they tried to get published. I wrote 3 novels that nobody wanted, lived in apartments that were barely bigger than closets, and there were times when I thought about giving up." "But you didn't," Denise said softly, already knowing the answer from the evidence surrounding them. "No, I didn't. And do you know why?" "Because I kept thinking about what you told me that day in the library. You said that with patience and care. Beautiful things can grow in the most unexpected places. You were talking about the secret garden, but you were really talking about life, weren't you? About how even when things seem hopeless, there's always the possibility of something wonderful growing from the work we put in." David's words struck her with unexpected force. She had forgotten saying that, but now the memory came flooding back, along with the recognition of how prophetic those words had turned out to be. Here was David, living proof that beautiful things could indeed grow in the most unexpected places. "My 4th novel was finally accepted by a publisher when I was 28, David continued. It was a story about a boy who finds healing through books, about the adults who shape us through small acts of kindness. It became a bestseller. And suddenly doors started opening that had been closed for years. I wrote 3 more novels after that, each one more successful than the last." He gestured toward a display near the front of the store where several books were prominently featured, their covers bearing his name, David Rodriguez. Denise recognized the author photo on the back of one of them, the same intelligent eyes and thoughtful expression, though more confident now than the shy child she had known. But success felt empty without being able to share it with the people who had made it possible, David said. "I tried to find you for years, Miss Denise. I hired private investigators, searched through school records, even posted on social media asking if anyone knew a teacher named Denise Martinez who used to bring her son Marcus to the Bay Riverside Library. It wasn't until 6 months ago that I finally tracked you down through the school district's retirement records. The revelation that he had been searching for her for years was almost too much to absorb. David, I can't believe you went to all that trouble just to find me. You saved my life, he said simply. Not dramatically, not in some big, obvious way, but in the way that really matters. You saw a scared kid who thought he had ruined something precious, and you taught him that mistakes could be fixed, that he was worthy of kindness, that his love of books was something to be celebrated rather than worried about. Do you have any idea how many foster homes and group homes I might have ended up in if I hadn't had those books you gave me to keep me company? And give me hope? The weight of his words settled over her like a warm blanket. She had never thought of her actions that day as anything more than common decency, the kind of thing any caring adult would do for a child in distress. To learn that such a simple gesture had echoed through the years, influencing the entire trajectory of someone's life, was both humbling and profoundly moving. But this bookstore, she said, looking around at the beautiful space, this must have cost a fortune, and to name it after me, I don't understand why you would do something so generous. David smiled, the expression transforming his face with joy. Because this isn't just a bookstore, Miss Denise. This is the realization of a dream that started the day you told me that stories need to be preserved so they can be shared with new readers. I wanted to create a place where other kids like I was could discover the magic of books, where families who can't afford to buy books could still have access to stories, where the love of reading could be nurtured and celebrated. He led her deeper into the store, pointing out various features as they walked. There was a children's section with low shelves and colorful rugs where young readers could sprawl comfortably with picture books. A teen area with beanbag chairs and graphic novels. A community room where local writers could give readings and book clubs could meet. And everywhere, careful attention to creating spaces that felt welcoming and accessible to people from all walks of life. The best part, David said, his voice filled with excitement, is our lending library program. See those books with the green stickers? Those are free for anyone to take home. No questions asked, no due dates, no late fees. When people are done with them, they can bring them back or keep them forever. We restock constantly, and we partner with local schools to make sure kids who need books can always find them here. Denise felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she absorbed the full scope of what David had created. This wasn't just a business, or even just a bookstore. It was a love letter to the transformative power of reading, a tangible manifestation of the values she had tried to model in her own teaching career. It was everything she had ever dreamed of creating herself, brought to life by someone whose life she had touched in the smallest way. And that, David said, guiding her toward the central display case, is the heart of everything. They stood together in front of the spotlit case containing the old library copy of The Secret Garden. The book was open to a page near the beginning, and Denise could see the faint line where the torn page had been repaired with book tape all those years ago. The repair had held perfectly, invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look for it. I bought this from the library when they were deaccessioning old books, David explained. Mrs. Henderson remembered me and was happy to sell it to me. She told me you had become a teacher, which was how I first started trying to track you down. This book sits here as a reminder that broken things can be fixed, that care and patience can restore what seems damaged beyond repair. Beside the book was a small placard with a quote that made Denise's breath catch in her throat. Books are meant to be read and loved, even if that means they sometimes get a little worn around the edges. The stories inside don't care if the pages are perfect, they just want to be shared. Below that, in smaller print, words of wisdom from Miss Denise Martinez, spoken to a frightened boy in the Riverside Public Library, November 1995. You remember exactly what I said, Denise whispered, amazed that her spontaneous words of comfort had been preserved so precisely. "I remember everything about that day," David said. "The way you knelt down beside me instead of looking down at me. The way you made me feel like my feelings mattered, like I wasn't just some poor kid who had caused a problem. You treated me like I was worth helping, worth caring about. That was the first time in my life that an adult outside my family had shown me that kind of unconditional kindness." He paused, his voice becoming thick with emotion. "My mom did her best, but she was always so tired, always worried about money and making ends meet. She loved me, but she didn't have the time or energy to nurture my love of reading the way you did. You saw something in me that day, something that maybe I didn't even see in myself." "I saw a boy who loved books," Denise said softly. "I saw someone who cared deeply about stories and who was afraid he had damaged something beautiful. I saw myself at that age, hungry for knowledge and terrified of making mistakes." "Exactly," David said, his eyes bright with understanding. "You saw me." "Really saw me? And then you took action to help, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. That's the definition of kindness, isn't it? Choosing to care when you don't have to." Around them, the bookstore hummed with quiet activity. People browsed the shelves, chatted in comfortable reading nooks, and listened to the poetry reading that was still continuing on the small stage. Children sat on the colorful rugs in the kids' section, absorbed in picture books while their parents sipped coffee nearby. It was exactly the kind of warm, welcoming literary community that Denise had always imagined in her dreams. "David, I need you to know something," she said, turning to face him fully. "What you've created here, it's not just beautiful, it's necessary. This is exactly what our community needs, what every community needs. You've taken the love of reading and turned it into something that will touch hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. I'm so proud of you I can hardly find the words." David's face lit up with a joy so pure and uncomplicated that she was transported back to that moment in the library when he had realized his beloved book could be repaired. "Does that mean you approve?" "I was so nervous that you might think it was presumptuous to use your name, or that you wouldn't understand what I was trying to do." "Presumptuous?" Denise laughed, the sound carrying pure delight. "David, this is the most wonderful honor anyone has ever given me. To know that something I did, something so small and simple, inspired all of this, it's overwhelming in the best possible way." She gestured around the store, taking in the carefully curated book displays, the comfortable seating areas, the obvious attention to creating a space where everyone would feel welcome. "This is my dream made real, but better than I ever could have imagined it. You've created something magical here. I want to show you something else," David said, leading her toward the back of the store. There, in a quieter section surrounded by comfortable armchairs and good reading lamps, was a special display case containing a collection of books that looked familiar. As they got closer, Denise realized with a start that these were some of the very books she had given to David all those years ago. The volumes from her own collection that she had carefully selected to help a frightened boy through a difficult transition. "You kept them," she said in wonder, recognizing the distinctive cover art and even some of the wear patterns she remembered from her own reading of these books. "Every single one," David confirmed. "They moved with me from apartment to apartment, through college and the struggling years in New York. When I finally had enough money to buy all the books I wanted, I still kept these separate, because they weren't just books to me. They were talismans, reminders of kindness, proof that someone had believed in me when I needed it most." He opened the display case and carefully removed one of the books, a paperback copy of A Wrinkle in Time. That showed obvious signs of having been read many times. The pages were soft with age, and the spine was creased from multiple readings. He opened it to the front cover, where Denise's name was written in her own handwriting. From decades ago. I must have read this book 20 times, David said, handling it with the reverence usually reserved for precious artifacts. Every time I felt lost or discouraged, I would think about Meg Murray and her journey to save her father, about how love and determination could overcome any obstacle. But more than that, I would think about you choosing to give me this book, trusting me with something that belonged to you. Denise felt tears welling up again as she looked at the familiar book, remembering the afternoon she had spent going through her small collection, choosing volumes that she thought would speak to a young boy facing uncertainty and change. She had selected each book with care, trying to create a library that would sustain him through whatever challenges lay ahead. I chose that one specifically because I thought you would relate to Meg, she said softly. She was so smart but so insecure, convinced that she didn't fit in anywhere. I thought you might see yourself in her and find hope in her journey. You were right, David said, carefully returning the book to its place of honor in the display. Meg taught me that being different wasn't something to be ashamed of, that the qualities that made me feel like an outsider, my love of books, my seriousness, my intense focus on school, those were actually strengths. She helped me understand that I didn't need to change who I was to find my place in the world. I just needed to find the right world for who I was. As they continued to explore the bookstore together, David introduced Denise to various staff members and community volunteers, each of whom greeted her with warmth and obvious respect. It was clear that David had told them about her, had shared the story of how their first meeting had influenced his life and led to the creation of this space. Several people mentioned specific programs or features of the store that had been inspired by things she had said, done. Details that David had remembered and incorporated into his vision. The children's librarian, a young woman named Carmen, told Denise about the Reading Angels program, where volunteers were trained to help children who were struggling with books or homework, providing the kind of patient, encouraging support that could make the difference between a child giving up on reading or falling in love with it. The program, Carmen explained, was modeled on David's description of how Denise had helped him that day in the library, showing him that adults could be allies rather than authorities to be feared. The events coordinator, an older gentleman named Frank, described the bookstore's commitment to hosting readings and workshops that were accessible to people from all economic backgrounds, with sliding scale fees and scholarships available for anyone who needed them. This policy, he said, reflected David's belief that access to literary culture shouldn't be determined by someone's ability to pay, a philosophy that had been shaped by his childhood experiences of finding refuge in the Trashen, free public library. As the evening progressed, Denise found herself in conversation with dozens of people who had been touched by David's work in various ways. There were teachers who had benefited from the bookstore's educational outreach programs, parents whose children had discovered a love of reading through the store's activities, and local writers who had found a supportive community through the workshops and reading series David had established. Each conversation reinforced her growing understanding of the profound impact that David's vision had already had on their community. This wasn't just a bookstore. It was a cultural institution that was actively working to break down barriers and create opportunities for people who might otherwise be excluded from literary culture. But perhaps most moving were the children she met throughout the evening, young readers who had clearly found in Miss Denise's library of dreams the same kind of sanctuary that David had discovered in the public library. All those years ago, she watched a little girl with thick glasses and a serious expression carefully selecting books from the free lending library, handling each volume with the same reverence that David had shown. She saw a group of teenagers gathered around a table in the young adult section, engaged in an animated discussion about a book they had all read, their faces bright with the excitement of shared discovery. These children reminded her powerfully of her own students over the years, the kids who would struggle with reading until they found the right book or the right encouragement, who had discovered through literature that their own experiences and feelings were valid and important. Seeing them in David's bookstore, surrounded by carefully chosen books and supported by adults who believed in the transformative power of reading, felt like witnessing the continuation of a legacy she had never realized she was creating. As the formal part of the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, David approached her with a proposal that took her breath away. "Miss Denise, I have something to ask you, and I hope you won't think I'm overstepping or presuming too much." She looked at him expectantly, curious about what else this remarkable evening could possibly hold. "I want to offer you a job," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush of nervous excitement. "Not just any job, but the position of Community Literacy Director. You would be responsible for developing and overseeing all of our educational programs, working with schools and community organizations to expand access to books and reading support. You would have complete creative control and a budget to make things happen." End quote. Denise stared at him in amazement. "David, I just retired. I was looking forward to slowing down, maybe doing some traveling, finally reading all the books I never had time for when I was teaching." "I know, and I'm probably crazy to ask," David said, but his eyes were bright with hope. "But Miss Denise, you're a born educator. You understand better than anyone how to reach kids who are struggling, how to make reading feel safe and exciting rather than intimidating. This store needs someone with your experience and your heart." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm not asking you to recreate your teaching career. I'm asking you to help me build something new. Something that could serve as a model for other communities. Imagine what we could accomplish together. All the kids we could reach, all the families we could help." The offer was tempting beyond measure. Here was an opportunity to continue her life's work in a setting that was free from the bureaucratic constraints that had sometimes frustrated her in the public school system. She could design programs from scratch, work with motivated volunteers and staff, and focus exclusively on fostering the love of reading without having to worry about standardized tests or administrative mandates. "Can I think about it?" she asked, though she already knew what her answer would be. "Of course," David said. "Take all the time you need. The position will be here whenever you're ready, whether that's next month or next year." As the evening finally came to an end, David walked Denise to her car, both of them reluctant to let this magical night conclude. The street was quieter now, with only a few people still lingering on the sidewalk, finishing conversations or taking final looks at the beautiful bookstore facade. "Thank you for coming tonight," David said as they reached her car. "Having you here, seeing your reaction to everything, it means more to me than I can possibly express. This place exists because of you, and knowing that you approve, that you're proud of what we've built, that's the greatest gift you could give me." "Thank you for remembering me," Denise replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for taking a small moment of kindness and turning it into something so beautiful and meaningful. Thank you for proving that love and patience really can make beautiful things grow in unexpected places." They hugged again, an embrace that felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. As Denise drove home through the familiar streets of her hometown, she found herself thinking about the mysterious ways that lives intersect and influence each other. How a single afternoon in a library could echo through the decades and ultimately create something wonderful. She thought about the scared little boy who had cried over a torn book and the confident, successful man he had become. She thought about the books she had given him, the letters they had exchanged, and the years of wondering what had become of him. Most of all, she thought about the lesson that his story had taught her, that kindness is never wasted, that small acts of care and compassion can have consequences far beyond what we can imagine. The next morning, Denise woke up with a sense of excitement and purpose that she hadn't felt in years. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, beginning to sketch out ideas for the literacy programs she could develop at Miss Denise's Library of Dreams. The possibilities seemed endless. Reading circles for parents and children, tutoring programs for struggling students, book drives for families who couldn't afford to buy their own libraries, writing workshops for several aspiring authors of all ages. She called Marcus to tell him about the extraordinary evening, and he listened with amazement as she described the bookstore and David's transformation from the shy child they had known to the accomplished writer, entrepreneur he had become. Marcus was as moved as she was by the story, and he encouraged her to accept David's job offer, pointing out that this was an opportunity to continue making a difference in ways that would be both meaningful and fulfilling. 2 days later, Denise called David to accept the position of Community Literacy Director. His joy was palpable even over the phone, and they made plans to meet the following week to begin discussing her vision for the programs she wanted to create. As she hung up the phone, Denise looked around her small apartment and realized that she was about to embark on an entirely new phase of her life. One that would be built on the foundation of a relationship that had begun with a simple act of kindness in a library more than 2 decades ago. It felt like coming full circle, like discovering that the ending of her story was actually just the beginning of something even more wonderful. The official announcement of her appointment appeared in the local newspaper a week later, accompanied by a photo of her and David standing together in front of the central display case containing the old copy of The Secret Garden. The article told the story of their first meeting and the chain of events that had led to the creation of the bookstore, presenting it as an inspiring example of how individual acts of kindness could have far-reaching consequences. The response from the community was overwhelming. Denise received dozens of phone calls and emails from former students, fellow teachers, and parents who had been touched by her work over the years. Many expressed excitement about her new role and offered to volunteer for the literacy program she was developing. It was clear that there was tremendous support for the bookstore's mission and enthusiasm for the expanded services she would be bringing to the community. As Denise settled into her new role, she found herself working more closely with David than she had anticipated. Despite his success as a novelist, he remained deeply involved in the day-to-day operations of the bookstore. And she discovered that he had an intuitive understanding of the needs of struggling readers that complemented her formal training as an educator. Together, they developed programs that were both innovative and practical, designed to reach children and families who might otherwise never discover the joy of reading. The Reading Angels program grew rapidly, with volunteers trained to provide one-on-one reading support to children who were having difficulty in school. The family literacy nights brought parents and children together for storytelling sessions and book discussions, creating opportunities for shared reading experiences that many families had never had before. The writing workshops for teenagers provided a safe space for young people to explore their creativity and find their own voices, with several participants already showing remarkable talent and potential. But perhaps most rewarding for Denise was the opportunity to work directly with individual children who reminded her of David at that age. Bright kids who loved books but lacked the support and resources they needed to thrive. She found herself thinking often of that afternoon in the library, remembering how a simple gesture of kindness had changed the trajectory of one child's life. And she tried to bring that same spirit of compassion and encouragement to every interaction. One afternoon, about 6 months after the bookstore had opened, Denise was working with a young girl named Isabella who was struggling with reading comprehension. Isabella was 8 years old, the daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs and didn't have time to help with homework. The little girl was bright and eager to learn, but she had fallen behind in school and was beginning to develop the kind of anxiety around reading that could become a permanent barrier to learning. As they worked together on a picture book about friendship, Denise found herself using many of the same techniques she had instinctively employed with David years earlier, kneeling down to the child's level, speaking in a calm, raw, and encouraging voice, focusing on the joy of the story rather than the mechanics of reading. When Isabella struggled with a particularly difficult word, Denise helped her sound it out patiently, celebrating each small success as if it were a major victory. "Miss Denise," Isabella said as they finished the book, "you make reading feel safe. At school, I get scared when I don't know a word, but here I know it's okay to make mistakes." The words hit Denise with unexpected force, reminding her so powerfully of David's experience that she had to blink back tears. Here was another child who needed to know that learning was a process, that mistakes were part of growth, that there were adults in the world who would support and encourage rather than judge and criticize. "Isabella," she said gently, "making mistakes is how we learn. Every reader, even the very best ones, started out by not knowing lots of words. The important thing is to keep trying, to keep reading, and to ask for help when you need it. There's no grass." Shame in learning. As Isabella hugged her goodbye that day, her small arms tight around Denise's waist, Denise felt the same sense of purpose and fulfillment that had sustained her through 30 years of teaching. This was her calling, her gift, her way of making the world a little bit better one child at a time. That evening, as she was closing up the bookstore, David found her in the children's section, straightening books and preparing for the next day's programs. They had developed a comfortable working relationship over the months, one built on mutual respect and shared commitment to their mission, but also on the deeper bond of their shared history. "How did it go with Isabella today?" he asked, settling into one of the small chairs designed for young readers. "Really well," Denise said, smiling as she thought about the little girl's breakthrough moment. She's starting to believe in herself, starting to understand that she can be a reader. It's the same transformation I've seen hundreds of times, but it never gets old. David nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It's like watching a garden grow, isn't it? You plant the seeds, you water them with patience and encouragement, and then one day you see the first green shoots pushing through the soil. "That's a beautiful way to put it," Denise said, struck by the appropriateness of the metaphor. It really is like tending a garden, creating the right conditions for growth, and then trusting that beautiful things will emerge. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts about the children they were serving and the difference they were making in young lives. The bookstore around them was quiet and peaceful, filled with the gentle presence of thousands of stories waiting to be discovered. "Miss Denise," David said finally, "do you ever think about that day in the library? About how different things might have been if you hadn't stopped to help me?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I think you would have found your way regardless. You had something inside you, a strength and a love of stories that would have survived any obstacle." "Maybe," David said thoughtfully. "But I don't think I would have become the same person. I don't think I would have understood the importance of giving back, of using whatever success I achieved to help others. That lesson came from you, from seeing how someone could choose to be kind without expecting anything in return." As the first anniversary of the bookstore's opening approached, David and Denise began planning a celebration that would honor not just their achievement, but the entire community that had embraced Miss Denise's library of teen dreams. The event would feature readings by local authors, including several teenagers from their writing workshops, displays of artwork created by children in their programs, and the announcement of several new initiatives they had developed over the past year. The celebration was even more successful than the original opening had been, with hundreds of people gathering to support the bookstore and the programs it had fostered. Denise watched with pride as former students read their own original stories, as parents talked about how the family literacy nights had transformed their relationships with their children, and as community members shared testimonials about the difference the bookstore had made in their lives. But the moment that touched her most deeply came when Isabella, the little girl she had been working with, stood up during the open microphone portion of the event and spoke in a clear, confident voice about how Miss Denise had taught her that reading was fun and that she didn't need to be afraid of books anymore. The 8-year-old's words were simple and heartfelt, and they received the longest applause of the evening. As the celebration wound down and people began to head home, Denise found herself once again standing in front of the central display case, containing the old copy of The Secret Garden. The book was still open to the same page, still showing the faint line where the torn page had been repaired, still serving as a symbol of the bookstore's mission to heal and restore rather than discard and replace. David joined her there, as she had known he would, and together they looked at the book that had brought them together and changed both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Do you think Mary Lennox knew when she first found the secret garden that she was going to transform not just the garden but herself? David asked, referring to the story that had played such a crucial role in their relationship. I think she hoped, Denise replied. I think she recognized that she had found something precious and worth fighting for, even if she couldn't see exactly what it would become. Sometimes the most important discoveries start with just a feeling that we found something that matters. Like a scared little boy finding kindness in a library, David said softly. Like a woman discovering that her life's work was just beginning when she thought it was ending, Denise replied. They stood together in the quiet bookstore, surrounded by thousands of stories and infinite possibilities. Both of them understanding that they had been part of something larger than themselves, something that would continue to grow and flourish long after they were gone. The scared little boy and the tired single mother had become partners in creating a legacy of literacy and compassion that would touch generations of readers yet to come. Outside, the streetlights cast gentle pools of light along Maple Street, and the paper lanterns that had been strung for the celebration swayed softly in the evening breeze. Inside Miss Denise's library of dreams, the books waited patiently on their shelves, ready to meet new friends and share their stories with anyone who needed them. The circle was complete, but the story was far from over. Every day brought new children through the doors, new opportunities to plant seeds of love for reading, new chances to demonstrate that kindness and patience could indeed make beautiful things grow in the most unexpected places. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that had been proven once again, that we never know how far the ripples of our actions will travel, or how many lives we might touch with a single moment of compassion. The old copy of The Secret Garden remained in its place of honor, a testament to the power of stories to heal, to transform, and to connect us across time and space. Like the garden in the story, the bookstore had been created through love and patience, tended with care and dedication, and open to share its beauty with anyone who needed a place to grow. As Denise locked the door behind them and walked with David into the quiet night, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter in a library to the creation of a literary sanctuary that was changing lives every day, their story was proof that the most meaningful adventures often begin with the simplest acts of human awe. Kindness. The scared little boy had become a successful author and generous philanthropist. The tired single mother had found her true calling as a community educator and advocate for literacy. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would continue to grow and flourish for years to come. And in the center of it all, a repaired book continued to tell its story of transformation and hope, reminding everyone who saw it that broken things could be fixed, that neglected places could bloom again, and that with patience and care, the most beautiful gardens could grow in the most unexpected places.